to Ms. Sutton, Ms. McGarry, and Mr. Sen. How has the scale of the challenge to prevent extremism changed over the past 12 months? Has it got better or worse? And if you could answer the question with reference to the key challenges in your borough. So if you were to start off, Ms. Sutton.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. I think for us, we are seeing, in terms of a change in dynamic with regards to more references coming through some of the existing processes and channels. So there are an increased number of referrals. One of the challenges for us is understanding the level of risk in the local area and how we therefore respond to that with limited resource and how we focus on meeting some of those demands. One of the most significant challenges for us is delays in funding opportunities and decisions. That means some of the programmes and activity are subsequently delayed by way of how the funding flows. And we're seeing that this year was around a delay of 6 months. So I think that's a key challenge that we recognise and need to look to address. There are some of the aspects and some views around the narratives around prevent that I'm aware are largely critical, and we need to look to how we address those, and how we have done that is through our local networks and community engagement. And we are at the point now where we've had the programme in Westminster for a number of years that we have a really established community network that works and responds locally.
Ms. McGarry?
So similarly, in a funny way to Westminster, I guess, the resourcing is an issue for us. Obviously, we're a non-priority borough, and one of the challenges we have is assessing our risk. We don't have particularly strong community networks or relationships with our community leaders, which is an area that has been tasked to one of our directors most recently. So that's a challenge. We have to rely on our partners to help us with our tension monitoring. And we haven't yet seen the most recent counter-terrorism local profile. I'm not sure when that's due. We haven't seen the most recent one of that yet to help us kind of forge a way forward. One of the things that we think about is engaging with our general public without increasing the fear around extremism and having the skills and the resources to do that effectively.
Okay, in terms of the scale of the threat, I wouldn't say it's hard to say whether it's gone up or down necessarily. What I would say is that the dynamics are changing. A couple of years ago, foreign travel was a big issue when ISIS was at its peak, and there was concerns of individuals going to Syria to join that organisation. We've seen less of that now for geopolitical reasons as well, but also there's a lot more awareness around individuals who may be seeking to do that. So that's certainly changed. The other thing that we've seen change as well is there's certainly been a decrease in overt activity, whether it's street stalls in the borough or events being hosted promoting extremist narratives. So there's a definite decrease in that. We've seen an increase in younger referrals coming through, and I think that's because since the Prevent Duty kicked in July 2015, we've done a lot more work with the primary sector, as in primary schools. So we have seen a number of reports coming forward of individuals who are being exposed to inappropriate materials or coming to school saying inappropriate things. Obviously that raises quite serious safeguarding issues. So we've seen probably an increase in that. So that's what I'll say would have changed probably in the last 12 months or so. In terms of challenges, I think there's a broader London-wide challenge around quality training for teachers, for public sector workers, for statutory bodies in general, rather than kind of short online courses, and proper, more detailed training I think is needed. I think there's a requirement for that to be rolled out in a more comprehensive way. There's also the kind of anti-prevent narrative, which has already been referenced by my colleagues, which I'm probably sure is shared by some of the members as well. That's something that we need to be more vocal in challenging and correcting in some cases.
If I could ask you, Mr. Eason, you previously described the rise in online radicalisation. And to you, Ms. Sutton and Mr. Sen, with issues like online radicalisation making it harder to identify and monitor individuals at risk, how confident can you be that you know who and how many people are vulnerable to radicalisation in your borough?
Well, the truth is we don't know exact numbers of people being radicalised. I mean, the nature of online extremism is such that, you know, you can be sitting in your bedroom in Lincolnshire and having conversations with individuals in Russia or parts of the world. We know, I don't think anyone knows who's accessing or what Twitter handles or making friends with who on Facebook. It is an issue. I think it's more of a national issue, really. I think government is having conversations with social media platforms like Twitter and Facebook and YouTube and seeking to kind of bring them into the fold. The problem is some of the changes that are required conflict with their business model. I think that's where the sticking point is. But I think it's important that we all recognise that young people are increasingly living their social lives online. They're making friends online, they're breaking friends, having relationships online. A lot of the social interaction is online. A lot of the information that they're getting about the world is from people they follow on Twitter and Facebook. I think that what we can do as local authorities, and a number of local authorities, including Waltham Forest and Newham, are doing this, is seeking to raise digital literacy within schools. So giving schools, trying to incorporate this into the curriculum so that young people grow up with an understanding of how to be safe online and how to be critical consumers of online content. I think that's the role we can play.
Absolutely.
Just continuing with the themes of challenges, Chair, can I just look, we've got the figures before us for the national referrals. I just want to get an extent of the type of challenges. We've got the figures before us for the national referrals. I just want to get an extent of the type of challenges in numbers of referrals you're trying to deal with. So what are they for London? So for 2015, there were nationally 3,955 referrals. So what percentage or numbers are we dealing with here in London, so we understand about the capacity and some of the issues between non-priority boroughs and others, because there'll be questions later on about that. So what figures are we dealing with?
I think there's probably two separate things there around local authority activity and resources, because a percentage of it will be to work with referrals. So in 2015, in terms of the number of referrals in Westminster, we had 66, which was a significant increase from previous years. However, a lot of the work and activity we do is with the commissioning of projects and work, and so that the resources are also focused on that, in addition to their work with communities.
Okay.
I think worth adding on that point, in terms of the scale of the problem nationally and London-wide, about over 50% of all individuals that have been convicted of a terrorist-related offence are from London. So London represents 50% of national convictions on terrorism.
So have we got a figure? Robin, Martin, what's the figure London for?
No, we haven't. I think one theme that was drawn out in your last report and in other people's conversation is the need for greater transparency on data.
Okay. So we could then, taking that point, we could assume roughly a major proportion of this national figure that we've got are from London. We should not assume, I presume, I hope you're going to say to me, that it doesn't really matter whether it's a priority borough or a non-priority borough, because referrals could still be quite high in a non-priority borough. Is that correct?
Well, from a non-priority borough's point of view, we had about 20 in 2015. It slowed down a little bit this year, and our last 3 channel panels have had no new referrals in to discuss them.
That must be quite heavy in terms of borough like Bexley, in terms of capacity to deal with. But we'll answer questions further on that. Just continuing on with, that will come later, we'll not leave that. Can I just ask, following up, Chair, about the future challenges, is really about sort of new and emerging challenges. The issue of parents taking their children outside the education, mainstream education system and homeschooling. The issue of after-school clubs and the registering awareness of those, and do they, and when I say after-school clubs, some of those could be very informal, not necessarily run by the council. Whereas, there's been a lot of work done with church groups about safeguarding children generally, about risks and of abuse. So the question, what is that an unmet challenge, or are you on top of that challenge in terms of your prevent work, of how do we keep track of that? What's your plan of action? Maybe it's not an issue. It just seems to me that it could be an emerging issue. Is there any work going on in boroughs, or has anyone got any thoughts about this particular aspect that I've raised?
It's certainly an issue that's on our radar, and it's certainly an issue that's real. I think the problem is it's a largely unmapped sector, so I don't think anyone knows the exact number of what's called supplementary schools exist. Ofsted doesn't regulate all of them, isn't aware of all of them, doesn't have the power to necessarily regulate all of them either, or there are changes within Ofsted. I think the problem we have as a local authority is the EHE, the elective home education legislation, is so weak that we have very few powers for people who not only choose to take their kids out of school, but don't even register the kids at all, so we don't even know where those kids are being schooled anywhere. What we're trying to do locally is establish an independent school board. We're trying to incentivise these schools to come and join so they can get advice and support from us as a local authority, and through that we can start reaching out to those organisations, try to work with them around safeguarding issues. I think the other challenge there is some of them want to stay below the radar because they deliberately don't want to be part. And this applies to Jewish schools in North London as well as Islamic schools in East London as well, because they do want to preach their very particular conservative brand of religion, which they don't necessarily want Ofsted watching in and telling them, you know, that's objecting to certain elements of that, and that I think is the real challenge. People who don't want to be on the radar at all.
Okay, thank you.
Assemblymember Berry.
Yeah, I just wanted to come in while we're on sort of broad themes and the challenges of online radicalisation. One of the things that came out of the last Assembly investigation into this was the need for a strong counter-narrative, the idea that the online people promoting radical ideas online have to have the better story, and that we need a strong counter-narrative to that. Now, I know Martin a moment ago talked about the counter-narrative to bad publicity about Prevent, but I just wanted to ask each of you, what role local authorities and London government can have in developing that counter-narrative that was seen as being needed. I know it was a rejected recommendation by the London Contest Board. They didn't think they had agency to do that, but it seems to me that schools, things that local authorities control, could be a really good source of that counter-narrative.
I think from a Westminster perspective, we absolutely do commission projects on that basis, whether it be around critical thinking in schools, parenting programmes and similar. And in addition to that, we have a Creating Stronger Communities project. And as you may be aware, we've also embarked on a significant piece of work, which is the Community Cohesion Commission, of which there'll be a report within the next couple of months in terms of the findings for that. And whilst it isn't intrinsically linked to Prevent, it's a much wider piece really there around local authorities' role in terms of community cohesion.
So I think most priority boroughs will do counter-narrative work. One of the things that struck me, and I've had various presentations in the London Prevent Board on this counter-narrative, is the sophistication of the Daesh message. So when you watch the videos that they produce, they are captivating. And I know the OSCT are looking at producing media that's equally as captivating, but it's very difficult. So, sophistication of the messages that have been sent out there are very high. And so at local authority level, there are things you can do within your local authority, but actually it requires a sort of national response in terms of a counter-narrative that then can be tailored to a local level.
You think the best way to counter the online messages is also to do that online rather than in schools in the real world?
I think you've got to use every form of communication that kids actually access. So, and, as we know, they increase day by day. So it's being up to speed, because you can bet your life the others will be up to speed and using those communication channels.
I think the real solution to this is to galvanise civil society organisations into taking on that challenge themselves, so it's not necessarily seen as top-down coming from government. But I think central government, obviously local government as well, has a role in supporting civil society organisations that are keen to do work in this area. And I think that's something that is already happening with the Home Office in particular, and with the local authorities. I think the other thing as well is to go back to my earlier point around digital literacy. And one of the things we do at schools is talk about conspiracy theory, talk about propaganda videos, for example, and play them, and how to unpick them, and how to kind of read between the lines when it comes to that kind of binary propaganda message. And I think that's something young people are actually very interested in. And I think schools are an incredibly powerful medium through which you can disseminate positive messages, because people tend to have trust with their teachers. It tends to be a supportive learning environment anyway. They're very switched on when they're in that environment, and they're there to learn. Especially when the message is coming from the teachers themselves rather than third parties coming in. So I think that's a very powerful way. So we can basically build resilience in young people so they're not necessarily attracted to these messages when they see them.
From
from a Bexley point of view,
Good morning. Sorry, I'd like to ask you all actually who's working in this area, but to start perhaps Martin. You mentioned about the idea of having a very vivid, how vivid these packages were, how alluring and how movie-like, I think. Could I just ask you to speculate, if this hasn't actually, the idea of a counter-narrative video or any counter-narrative hasn't really been put in place, what should that counter-narrative be? You said, I think you just partly answered my question there about it not being top-down, but what should be this counter-narrative in your opinion?
So what it shouldn't be is a government information video. It needs to be something that is as appealing to children, to kids, and to teenagers as a movie or a game or whatever. So I think it just needs to be constructed in a way that actually gives messages around the way in which people are being exploited to the wrong aims. Be very clear about those messages, but presented in a way that fits with the way in which kids get information and live their everyday lives.
So you mean, when you're talking about kids, by the way, can you, what sort of age are we talking about?
Well, so we start our work from 5 years upwards to 18 and out into university. So that's sort of age range.
Yes.
I think in order to develop a counter-narrative, if you even talk about counter-narratives, we need to understand what the ISIS narrative or the Al-Qaeda narrative is in the first place. They have a very binary narrative, as all extremist groups do, in which the world is divided into two warring factions, Muslims versus non-Muslims. And they're encouraging British Muslims and European Muslims to sort of join them and not be loyal to the states that they're living in and treat the states that they're living in as the enemy and treat them as the salvation for that particular cause. So it's a binary divisive narrative that seeks to create a them and us mentality. So we have to understand what their narrative is first. We also have to understand how young people consume content these days. Young people don't read books, for example, anymore. And people look at short videos, 30-second videos, memes are shared online, short animes, and sort of flashy, sharp, short content is how most people learn and share content online. And that's exactly what ISIS is doing, it's producing very short, sharp content, that's why it's so compelling. So we need to step into that space and do the similar thing, but use content that's as attractive as theirs in terms of the way it's presented, but also have a very positive message around Britishness, for example, around being British, about being an inclusive society which embraces people from all backgrounds, specifically to make Muslims feel included and part and parcel of British society. And I think Sadiq Khan being male, so that's a strong message in itself. So I think we need to know what our message is, and we need to know how to communicate that message.
I'm very encouraged that you say that, particularly the last bit, because I'm thinking of the war on drugs and all the rest of it. Is that essentially when you just put out, possibly, something saying this is terrible and don't join it, there's a kind of impulse maybe to say, I'm not listening to them, I'm going to go ahead, or whatever. The idea of actually giving them a positive framework and say why this is better than that.
Well, that's part of the reason why the whole war on terror thing was so off-putting, because it's a negative, it sounds negative, and people are not necessarily galvanised by something that's got a negative connotation, which is a war on something. But if something has a positive connotation, we're bringing people together, we're bringing communities together, we're creating mutual understanding, mutual tolerance, that's a positive message. That's something young people are more likely to want to embrace. I think you're right, that's what we need to do, have a positive message.
I suppose I'd certainly...
Islamic extremism or that from the far right. So
yes, I'm not doubting that they exist, but I think that this is reality, isn't it? I mean, it's mostly, your work is mostly to stop people joining ISIS or whatever.
That's not a view that I totally share, because I see this as a bit...
I think just to clarify, I think, from our perspective as local practitioners, we are focused on all forms of extremism, and we do come across many far-right cases. But at the same time, you are right. The only reason why Prevent exists is because of 7/7, and the vast majority of the cases that we deal with in London are people who are trying to join jihadist organisations. So you're right in that sense. But at the same time, we can't have a message focused just on that crowd. We need a general message that basically says extremism as a phenomenon is bad, whether it's far left, far right, whether it's jihadist, whether it's environmental, whether it's animal rights, whatever it is. Anything that seeks to break the law and get young people to break the law is something that we as a local authority need to have an action plan around.
So just very quickly, we've seen a rise in hate crime in recent months, which seems to me to play into the divisive narrative and potentially strengthen the IS message. Also, potentially, this might have led to a rise in far-right radicalisation. So have you noticed any of that in your work? What has the rise in hate crime sort of made, how has that made a difference to what you do?
There has been a widely reported post-Brexit spike in hate crime, particularly attacks on people from Eastern Europe. We've had a few cases locally as well of that. Whether that's a temporary spike that will kind of cool down, or whether it's here to stay, we don't know. It's too early to say that yet. However, I think at the same time, it was always there. It's just that the media tends to focus on stories like that around the time of something like Brexit, because it's more of a topical story. But these kind of attacks were happening before as well, but its media just wasn't picking them up. So I think there is a challenge around broad hate crime, targeting a range of different people. And that's something that we as Prevent practitioners would also be concerned about, because like I said, our focus is broad in terms of extremism as a phenomenon. So anything that's hateful, that's bigoted, that's discriminatory against certain groups in society is something that we would have views on and we would have an action plan around. But also, I think the messaging that we're delivering through schools and through community groups to young people is a broad message that preaches a broad tolerance, a broad respect for people of different backgrounds, different ethnicities, different religious groups, etc. So we're hoping our work we're already doing will impact attitudes towards that.
I think just to add to that, I think we'd always accepted, there's probably a large amount, if not massive amount.
Sarah and Gaffer, because you are from priority boroughs, and I think we're just going to explore this a bit. What sort of activities do you undertake as part of your work to prevent extremism? Because we've had evidence in the past that there's a lack of uniformity in approach across London. So can you expand a bit on what you do as part of your work?
Yeah, I mean, I can give some examples of some of the work that we're commissioning. I've touched on some of it. So we are working with a parenting programme, which is a 14-week programme based on equality, really, and strengthening families and communities. But within the context of that, there is an element for Prevent, and we see that actually it improves engagement and dialogue. We are also working on a Creating Stronger Communities session of workshops that specifically address the social needs of Muslim women. Again, there's a range of things within that which include substance misuse, violence against women and girls, and specifically, as we touched on earlier, internet and social media safety, in addition to radicalisation. And we're particularly working on a project at the moment that looks at focused around youth projects in conjunction with our gangs and serious youth violence unit as well, so a kind of joint commissioned activity. And one of our main focuses continues to be youth mentoring projects, which work in a range of different ways with a range of different people, not just those who had been referred in terms of a threshold or a level, but actually a much far wide-ranging, and that also works with institutions and schools. Another area is focused around the family, and I think we touched on that earlier, around actually there's sometimes a family safeguarding and vulnerability approach we need to take with young brothers and sisters potentially as well. So we have actually commissioned some materials and a play which focuses on some of these aspects through the lens of a young person, as it were, that may be part of a family network.
What's the reach of some of your projects? What sort of numbers are you?
Significant numbers. I mean, in some cases, we're talking that the schools project is hundreds and hundreds, and we have a rolling programme that reports back regularly on volumes of numbers.
What about your parenting programme, for example? Just give a flavour into numbers.
I should have the figures here. But again, significant in terms of numbers. What I will have is some of the figures for the latest couple of quarters. So in the latest quarter, in terms of the parenting programme, that's around 100 parents that have engaged.
That's very good. So it is reaching a lot of people then. Gaffer, from your borough.
Yeah, so our local work focuses around in terms of the framework we look at it is through the 3 I's, which is institutions, individuals and ideology. So that's the work we do. In terms of institutions, a lot of the time is spent giving training to public sector workers, whether it's teachers, probation officers, people working in the healthcare profession, and a wide range of public sector workers. And we always make sure that's one-to-one interactive training, so they have the opportunity to ask lots of questions and really come to grips with the issues we're asking them to be involved with. We also view the education system as an effective means to deliver positive messages through to young people. So last year we adopted a range of lesson plans from different providers, and we approached schools with these lesson plans. Some were just ordinary formatted lesson plans, some were a video they can watch and then have some activities after, all of which cover or talk about extremism as a phenomenon. I think that was important to try to open up discussions within classrooms so young people can be exposed to different points of view around these issues, and also to encourage people to talk about what's on their mind and how they're interpreting things. So obviously young people are affected by events in Paris, for example, or events in Syria, and they have questions. They've heard things from their peers, from parents. So hopefully we're trying to create an environment within the classroom where they can bring those thoughts and concerns and have a discussion around them. So we were very active in doing that last year, and I think that activity reached over 2,000 pupils within the borough. There's now a website been launched as well called Educate Against Hate, which is a central government DfE launched website which has a lot of those lesson plans on it if you want to have a look at some of those. This year we're doing 2 new projects. We're working with a Lewisham-based company called Second Wave, who've got a project called Shadow Games, which is a kind of a theatre play production. We hopefully bring that into schools. I think theatre is a very interesting means of delivering a message that's very engaging, and it's delivered by young people as well, from a similar background to those that they're going to be interacting with. And that's a play about young people who get radicalised and by an individual, and then the actors stay in character and the young people can question them about their motives in it. So I think that's something we're seeking to do to about at least 5 or 6 schools in the borough, with 2 crowds of about 50 to 60 people. So a few hundred people hopefully there. The other project we're working on is a local community-based group called New Choices for Youth, and they're running a leadership programme. So they're going to have a recruitment process and recruit about 35 young people from the borough to take them on a 12-week leadership course where they can give them training around public speaking, writing. So hopefully through that we can create young people who are confident and aware of these issues. They can go back into the community and speak about these issues, and hopefully use that as well to create young leaders to talk about these issues amongst people of their age. So the projects we're involved with. As well as that, obviously there's the channel, there's the individual side, so individual referrals that we deal with through Channel and PCM. Then there's the ideology side, which is basically monitoring the borough and making sure individuals and organisations that seek to come into the borough to stir up tensions aren't, or make a hostile reception for individuals like that. And it has been a problem historically in Newham. Individuals, many of whom are now in Syria with ISIS, were giving out leaflets and setting up street stalls outside Stratford Station, for example. Same people were frequenting Waltham Forest as well. There has been a decrease in that activity, but we're still aware that those people exist, putting stickers up on lampposts, for example, and giving out leaflets. So that we're aware of the kind of activity, something we are seeking to disrupt as much as we can with the limited powers we have. But at the same time, there's a very positive story here as well. And Newham is, I've been told, and Umnesh can correct me on this, but Newham is the most diverse place on earth. Over 200 languages are spoken in Newham. Newham is 15% white British, so it's an incredibly diverse place. And according to the surveys that we've commissioned at local authority, 86% of residents are quite satisfied with their lives, with the community cohesion in the borough. So that's a real success story in integration, really, in the borough, and that's the story we should be singing about. But because of that, we're so keen to make sure that that kind of fragile tapestry isn't attacked or disturbed by organisations and individuals.
Can I just add a point of clarification?
Really significant numbers, really interesting work, very diverse, trying to do all sorts of things in this area. But where does the accountability for this sit? Because is it with the local authority? Is it with the Home Office? How do you balance the differing requirements of both your democratically accountable local authority, yet this is Home Office driven in some ways?
Yeah, I mean, the projects are only funded by the Home Office, so we are accountable to them in terms of delivery and meeting our expectations and targets. The Home Office also has a team that evaluates the projects as well, the Behavioural Insights team. So we have them independently evaluated by the Home Office, but also accountable to the Home Office for those projects. For the broader work, we obviously accountable to our elected members within the local authority. So we have scrutiny meetings once a month, and we have meetings for Children's Services once a month as well. Management meetings internally. So we have lots of meetings where we talked about our activity to our elected members who scrutinise our work.
Very similar response from me on that.
Particularly the accountability is the Home Office because they pay for it, but
for projects, yes.
But you engage your members wider. Okay. Thank you.
Assemblyman Shaloni, followed by...
Just on some of the examples that you gave, I think one of the realities is that when you do discuss this for schools, there could be some resistance. So again, when we were talking about violent youth crime, we saw that a number of schools where essentially there was a problem didn't want to admit it because of that stigma. Are you finding any resistance in some of the schools that you've tried to work with, or youth groups?
I've heard about this resistance a lot in the media, but I've not seen it locally. I mean, my team has trained 4,000 public sector workers in the last 2 years. Most of those are teachers. Some of us have some questions, some legitimate questions around what we're doing, which I'm happy to answer and happy to discuss. But in terms of this kind of fierce mass resistance, I'm just not seeing it. They've seen things, they've heard things in the classroom. They're aware that we're talking about a real issue. And most of them understand that there's something that needs to be incorporated into their standard safeguarding practices. And they get that. We don't have to sell them that message. They get it the moment they turn up. So they've already got questions around how do we do that rather than should we do that. I think obviously that our work has been helped by Prevent being put on a statutory footing in 2015. So they know that Ofsted's going to be asking questions around this as well. So that obviously makes our work a bit easier. But no, I don't see that, that resistance that I read about. I am aware that there are individuals within the community, for example, who have a negative perception of Prevent. And that's obviously fueled by some very inaccurate reporting in some cases. There's been a number of cases of individuals who claim to have been referred to Prevent, who weren't actually referred to Prevent at all. So there has been some quite blatant inaccurate reporting around Prevent, and I think certain organisations and individuals find that Prevent clashes with their own personal ideological agenda. So they're sort of blinded to the broader safeguarding message there, and that's a challenge that we have to engage in as well, and we are seeking to.
So in Waltham Forest we have had some of that resistance. On occasion, programmes that we've delivered in schools, pressure's been put on the governing body to stop that piece of work. To be fair, this is an area where we're all experimenting, and some of our work was quite early on, and we might have presented it in a different way to the way that we would present it now. So I think, we're all experimenting. There's different ways of doing this, but particularly in the school environment, you have to be very sensitive about how you present this work. And so, I think we've learnt from some of our early experiences. So we see less of that resistance. The only problem is that as soon as you start getting some of that resistance, you'll find that people that are against Prevent will focus on your borough and target schools to prevent that work taking place. So, we have to be quite proactive communicating the positive Prevent messages all the time.
Thank you. Mr. Hussain, with Newham in particular, you talked about your work in schools and the difficulties of that. I wondered, what about the, if you like, informal or possibly unregistered madrasas? What is your attitude and what is your approach there? Because I would assume that, we don't quite know what children are being taught in those places. And also, for that matter, that possibly the teachers are not even formally CRB checked or whatever. I mean, do you do any, this would seem to be the nub of the matter, it seems to me.
That is an issue. We do have good ratios with some of our madrasas, and we've done some training with some of them, so it's not, I don't want to demonise that entire sector, but at the same time we are aware that there are madrasas out there. These are very small organisations that are, above, shops on the street, they're not quite hard to reach. We're aware that, we aren't aware of what they're teaching. And we are aware that most of them don't have qualified teachers, don't have the right facilities to be a school, don't have the right resources. We're aware of a couple that have been preaching messages that we would, object to quite strongly. And those we refer to Ofsted, and action is being taken through Ofsted and DfE on those particular organisations. But with the powers we have to try to use, we have to try to be, we don't have strong powers to go in there and knock the door down and say, do this and do that. So we have to be a bit more subtle in how we approach that with the powers we have at the minute. But I accept there could be schools we're not aware of at all. I accept that could be the case. Those that we are aware of, we are seeking to reach out to and bring into the fold so we can talk to them and have conversations with them.
This isn't a facetious question at all, but would you like to have those powers? Would you like to have stronger powers?
Ooh, okay. Stronger powers. I think there does need to be stronger legislation around elective home education. I think local authorities should have more powers to ask parents questions around the kind of education that young children are receiving if it's not within a school. and who's delivering that education, and even probably submit a report, once a month on what exactly has been taught and by who. I think those powers would be useful.
That's very useful to know, because it seems to me that that this is a very. I mean, you would not, as Prevent, would you be actually invited or allowed into a madrasa to talk? Would you?
I have been. I have delivered training in madrasas, and like I said, some of them are very good on safeguarding. But it's the smaller backstreet ones that I'm aware of that do exist, both in London and elsewhere, that I have concerns about people who want to stay below the radar. But because in many of those cases, the parents have taken the children out of school for sectarian reasons. They don't want them to be interacting with mainstream society. They think that's a bad influence on their young people, and they're the ones we're concerned about. There was a widely reported case in Tower Hamlets where a school was being run by individuals who were linked to Anjem Chowdhury and Al Mahajiroon, called the Sadiq Academy, which is now being closed down. But that's what can happen. These people can set up their schools and not talk about it and just stop getting people to go there. So it's something we have to. There has to be stronger legislation around centrally.
Thank you.
Somebody Member Prince?
Thank you. Pretty much a fundamental question, really. What impact do you think that campaigns like those run by the National Union of Students against the Prevent duty, do you think that has much impact, really?
In terms of students, probably, it might be influencing the minds and views of young people who are starting to become politically aware. I think what I found interacting with students as well is there's actually quite a big backlash against some of that. There's quite a big NUS disaffiliation campaign going on now. I think last year 4 universities disaffiliated partially because of these reasons, and that campaign will continue this year, and many other universities are. So there's a lot of young people that I've spoken to who are quite repulsed by what the NUS has become. And some of the statements that have come out of the current leader have been questioned by various people and mocked as well by others. At the grassroots level, I don't think it had much of an impact outside of sort of student circles.
There's a question here really for just to finish a bit to Martin really, but Robin, you might be able to pick that. MOPAC said that the London Prevent Board would carry out a review to assess the response to the duty of public bodies. Has that review been completed?
No, it hasn't been completed. What has happened is that the OSCT, through the Home Office, carried out a review, and that took place in, I think it was June or July of this year, to see the impact and how Prevent has actually been carried out. But that is something that clearly I'd like to do, but we need to be resourced to do it. So I'm going to have a discussion about that.
So are you citing lack of resources?
Yeah, I mean, the London Prevent Board is basically me chairing it, and a little bit of a secretariat, that's all it is.
Just to add to that, the national review of Prevent has not yet been published, and is waiting the full review of the contest strategy, which is due sometime later on this year. And Prevent is kind of as a major item on the next contest board, which is on the 13th of this month. Martin's coming along to that.
It was MOPAC that made the commitment on behalf of the London Prevent Board, so maybe MOPAC should come up with the resources.
I'll take that away.
Just following on from the comments from Assembly Member Prince made, look, I hope you continue to resist the ill-informed when looking after our young people. Do you know what I mean? That must be the priority, and anything done on that where people, there's legitimate debate to make things better in a difficult situation and make improvements. For those who just want to bury their head in the sand and not recognise the threat, we've got to resist. Going on to the reviews that done, and it just sort of come to my mind, do we do evaluation of some of the work that we're doing in priority boroughs and non-priority boroughs about that role of the work? What's the impact of that work? And I imagine there's some added value work going on. But in terms of worth targeting, does it make a difference? Those issues, can you give us any evidence that goes on about the expenditure that is given it's given to priority boroughs, or even evaluation of the non-priority boroughs and their activities they're doing in terms of when you share best practice.
So there's, there's a pretty rigid framework in terms of the Home Office funding, and so they'll carry out evaluation on a project-by-project basis. But I don't think that's what you're really asking. It's about, well, the totality of those projects. Are they making a difference in the locality? And I don't really see that taking place, and I think that is something that is worthwhile doing. But people may be closer to it than me.
I think it's very hard to measure the impact across the borough, to a whole range of people. I think probably the most accurate way to do that is genuine opinion polls, which are being conducted not by governments but by independent polling organisations. And I think both nationally and globally, support for extremism has been going down for the past 4 or 5 years. It doesn't mean that those that remain don't become more hardcore and more ruthless, but overall support has been dropping, certainly since 2009, 2010. Don't necessarily mean that's a result of prevent activity, but that is a broader trend. We can only really evaluate the specific work that we do. So we evaluate our RAP training sessions, see the feedback we get from them. We evaluate the projects we deliver and see if they've been affected. It's harder for us to evaluate anything beyond that, really, isn't it?
So, Member Berry?
I just wanted to go back to the negative publicity that we can't ignore that there is about Prevent, I don't think. There was an Ofsted report this June that talked about many people just regarding it as just doing referrals and that being like the bare minimum. I wondered if you could comment on that, because it seems to me that simply doing referrals is possibly the least helpful thing you could do. That actually the more positive, more involving things, involving discussions in classrooms and in universities are the things that we should be trying to make sure do happen, and how the negative publicity, the fact that people maybe see it as a dampener on free expression, how that can be worked into your programmes. It seems to me only the priority boroughs may be able to do anything about that, because they don't have the resources to do anything other than refer in the non-priority boroughs. Just can you possibly talk about how that aspect of things?
So I think you picked the difference between priority and non-priority boroughs. So priority boroughs are generally funded to do that more detailed work. So it's not just about teachers referring people that they think exhibit behaviours, but it's then, even before that happens, it's working with the classes at quite a young age through on packages to sort of deliver those messages in a classroom setting. So we can afford to do that, and I think Newham can afford to do that, but that's where Bexley can't afford to do that.
I'd agree with that.
We'd make it clear as well in the training sessions that with all schools that we know there's an expectation to be proactive as well as reactive. And I would say most of our schools do some proactive work around this area, whether it's themselves or some external parties that do some proactive work. But how we can scale that across London and across the country is a challenge that needs to be met.
And I think some of that goes back to the trust and the relationship that you have locally with those organisations, which won't just be around the Prevent agenda, it will be around a whole host of things. And actually, I don't think you can underestimate the value of some of those relationships and how that influences and supports a more positive narrative.
Can I ask how, maybe you, Sarah, how useful the referral process is as part of that package of measures? Does it actually contribute?
I think that's a really interesting question. I think we've already touched on, actually, this isn't one thing in isolation, and the referrals process is part of this wider package, and that in isolation its effectiveness is more around addressing some of that. And I think that goes back to the point I made around that level of engagement and how that interactions with the police primarily. So I think all of that is really sort of feedback we've given throughout today, which is something that needs to be reflected upon.
There was one other thing you mentioned, sorry to just ask for clarification. You talked about the vulnerability framework and how it may need to change. Does that relate to the changing nature of attacks, the changing from more organised things to maybe lone wolves, people who are more vulnerable? A safeguarding approach might be more appropriate to them because they're vulnerable in other ways. Can you expand on
Yeah, exactly that, exactly all of those things really, and I think some of that is quite focused on around specific ideology as well, and so I just think all of those points that you've made and more around, we just need to recognise that should be a dynamic process, actually, is what I would suggest. It should be a dynamic process based on current vulnerabilities and risks. And at the moment, I think it's a bit more, it's not as dynamic as it should be.
Is the framework a set of signs that you look for? Is that what you're saying?
I mean, it's almost a questionnaire, isn't it? Basically, it's a question, very specific questions. You know, that then the framework provides then a level of risk based on individuals' answers to those questions, if those individuals are happy to engage and answer those questions in the first place.
We will now move to the next theme, which is on transparency and engagement. And I believe Assembly Member Shalomi, you have a question.
Robin, you touched on it earlier in terms of some of the meetings that the contest board have held, and I think one of the things that we've established is the difficulties in some of the decisions that have been taken and the efforts to prevent extremism and what's discussed at those boards. So we know that there was a contest board meeting in July, which was private and invite only. You may recall that at a previous committee, MOPAC agreed to publish more information about the contest board. Do you know if this has taken place yet?
No, it hasn't. I think for the context here is that, you know, we've held 4 meetings of the London Contest Board so far, and clearly in that time there has been, again, a transition. So we've got a new Deputy Mayor for Policing and Crime. So some of the progress we could have made, there's no criticism of anyone individually here, this is a reality of transition, has not been made. So we're having another meeting in October for the contest board, and I think that issue around transparency is still, yes, being considered by the contest board, but we have to take it one step at a time, and part of that step is actually we are bringing together a whole host of different individuals to talk about a subject which hasn't been spoken about before. So there's an element of building confidence between the partners, getting shared understanding between the partners, and then that is something that I think we'll be much more confident in actually making much more transparent.
But on that, would you not agree that in terms of some of that secrecy around that is some of the problems where people don't trust what's going on?
Well, I don't think we'd use the word secret for the contest board. We don't publish its minutes at the moment. I accept that. But I think secret's probably putting the wrong stress on how the contest board operates. You know, as I say, I think we are very much determined to take it in a more transparent way, but we are kind of have to work with partners to make sure everyone agrees to that, to make sure everyone's comfortable with that. And actually, transparency, yes, is something to be aimed at.
So hopefully we'll see more publicity around that, because again, currently on the MOPAC website, there's no information about contests. So going forward to help in terms of, again, getting more people on board, raising the awareness, would you agree that that's the step?
Yeah, at a personal level, I think that's really a really good and laudable ambition. Obviously, that's a matter for the whole contest board to decide. But I see no reason why it shouldn't.
Interesting thing there as well, and something that we haven't touched on, is that there are a number of other elements within contest, you know, around whether it be from certainly from a local authority that we have a regime similar to some of the work that we're doing on prevent, around protect and prepare and all of those elements. So I think from a local authority point of view, it would be good to see some increased profile of some of the other activity and work that's going on across the whole contest agenda.
Yes, yeah. And certainly the London Critical event, which was held during the summer, was an attempt to kind of broaden that out, which was very much focusing on the prepare agenda.
Barry?
So yeah, following on from that, one of the other recommendations the committee made last time we looked into this was that the contest and prevent boards themselves should be raising awareness of the work that they do. So I wanted to ask how confident you are that local authorities, public services, other people involved in prevent are aware of the board and the work that they do.
I think, well, I can't really speak for where local authorities are. That's a question I hope Martin will be able to shed more light on. But I think certainly one of the key aspects will be, as I say, you know, driving better understanding across pan-London agencies, and then actually going out and doing things differently. So the London Critical event, when we had all local authorities in to talk about, you know, what would London look like, what would London feel like at a critical, was a part of the contest board engagement activity. The work we've done on the counter-terrorism local profiles and actually trying to restructure those to actually make them more open, you know, to encourage the policing to share more information on the basis that actually if the police are sharing more information, other agencies, other communities will be more inclined to share information with them. So by changing that, that's another visible demonstration of what the contest board are trying to do. Can we do more? We certainly can do, but we've only had 4 meetings so far.
Yeah, my next question, written down here, is how could you be more transparent? So, I mean, do you have any plans to make plans? Are you going to be?
Well, as I say, certainly we reviewed, you know, the PCC, the last PCC report, so people on the contest board are aware of that agenda of transparency, and I think we will move slowly towards that, but that's a decision for the board as a whole.
Just talking about London Prevent Board, so all local authorities will receive the minutes of the Prevent Board, and there's attendance, pretty wide attendance from London boroughs at that. In the 3 years that I've been chairing the board, I've never come across anything top secret, to be honest with you. It is an OSCT board, in effect, so, you know, I'd be more than happy for its work to be, you know, spread more broadly in the right sort of way. But so anyway, I think amongst local authorities there is a lot of information, but probably not beyond that.
I think the challenge there is about that narrative piece, and any communication needs to be under that wider guise of the context that supports that. So I think sometimes there may well be a challenge with the you know, meeting minutes, etc., which don't actually give the full context. So I think there will be some work to do on what that looks like, would be my recommendation.
I mean, here we're being broadcast on the web right now, and every word of what we're saying is being, and we're talking about the same kinds of issues you must be talking about in those meetings. So it isn't secret, is it?
No, absolutely not. But it's just the narrative behind some of it is important in the context of challenging and conflicting narratives on the subject.
I wanted to expand on engagement, actually, which is another theme as well as transparency. Sorry, is that okay?
Yeah.
Just
we've got questions on the theme coming as well.
Really?
Yeah.
I wanted to, maybe it's the wrong time to do it. I wanted to ask about the parallels with the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy and how flat that is in comparison. Is that? So we've previously looked at violence against women and girls. There's a pan-London strategy. There's a lot of engagement by voluntary and public sector groups working in this area. They seem very, very happy with the results, and it's quite simple and quite a flat structure. It seems that in this area that there's a lot of complication, a lot of different boards. The Home Office's best practice catalogue of things that you can do seems to me that it might not be something that came up from grassroots organisations. So I just wanted to ask, are there plans to make things more engaging, devise more programmes with Londoners themselves? I noticed that the Met have started talking to social media savvy young Muslims in terms of developing things online. Is there more that can be done to engage actual young people in this within London, within the framework that we currently have?
I think there's a lot more that can be done, and I think, you know, there's an argument to commission London-wide initiatives that aren't just focused on one local authority. That's probably a role you could play in doing that. But I think with the resources we have at local level and the time restrictions, we have to deliver our projects and do all the other things that we've spoken about. It's very difficult for us to then go out and then seek to develop other initiatives from scratch. If we had more resources, we could do that, and there's a will to do that, and there's a good argument to do that. But I think with the resource limitation, it's very difficult.
Is the best practice catalogue useful?
It's very limited. The projects in it are good, but there could be a much wider range of projects and a wider range of partners.
So I see this as a